Susan, Premier Li Keqiang's press conference covered major political, economic, social, and foreign policies, but the most sensitive subject was China's continuing economic slowdown. At the opening of this year's Congress, Premier Li set the country's target for GDP growth to 7%, the lowest in over 2 decades. He then warned it won't be easy for China to meet this lower target.
在新常态下，我们会保持
Under the new normal state, we need to ensure China's economy operates within a proper range. If our growth speed comes to the lower limit of our proper range of economic operation and affects the employment situation and the increasement of people's income, we are prepared to step up targeted micro-policy adjustments to anchor market expectations. The good news is that in the past couple of years, we have not used massive stimulus measures to increase economic growth. That means there is ample room for microeconomic regulations.
To keep all this in perspective, because China's GDP is well over $10 trillion, Li said that a 7% increase is still equivalent to the entire economy of a medium-sized country. China has kept a 2-digit GDP growth rate for years. But that economic miracle has come at a cost, ranging from environmental deterioration like the weather today to overcapacity and to rampant corruption. Premier Li Keqiang said that kind of growth is unsustainable, and to keep China's economy moving forward, reform is badly needed.
This is a reform to the government itself. During the course of reform, the vested interests will be upset. This is not nail clipping. Instead, this is taking knife to one's own flesh. So pain is natural. However painful it may be, we are determined to keep going until our job is done.
Besides the economy, Li also commented on foreign policy. He said the Sino-Japanese ties are facing, quote, a test and an opportunity on the 70th anniversary of the end of the World War II, stressing that Japan should face the history squarely. He also reiterated China's willingness to build a new type of major power relationship with the United States. Susan?
Well, Han Peng, over the last 2 weeks, tell us what have been the major highlights of the meetings?
Well, Susan, nearly 3,000 deputies spent the past 11 days scrutinizing the government's work. They raised suggestions and voiced criticisms. On the last day, a number of documents were approved, including amendments to the legislation law. Let's take a look.
这些腐败分子无论逃到天涯海角，也要面对。
From the top legislators
在反腐这个问题上，大家都很任性。
to the political advisors
对腐败分子零容忍。
and to the heart of the Chinese government, anti-corruption campaign remains a major focus through the political season. The Procurator General announced to the NPC that there would be no end to this fight.
Over the past year, we've investigated and handled 3,664 cases of corruption, bribery and embezzlement involving over 1 million RMB each. That's up 42% compared to the previous year. 28 corrupt officials at provincial or ministerial level or above have been handled according to the law. They include Zhou Yongkang, Xu Caihou and Jiang Jiemin.
The economy also dominated the agenda, as this year's 2 session came at a time when China is coping with a continuing economic slowdown. Premier Li Keqiang set a target of GDP growth at its lowest for a quarter of a century.
The target growth rate of approximately 7% takes into consideration what is needed and what is possible. This target is aligned with our goal of finishing building a moderately prosperous society and is appropriate in terms of the need to grow and upgrade our economy.
But for many, the prospects are not all pessimistic. The government calls the lower growth rate the new normal. And some foreign ambassadors observing the meetings had positive things to say.
I think that the slowdown is by far exaggerated and gives a wrong understanding of what is happening in China. I think that 7% growth that is more sustainable is much more attractive than 10% growth that is not sustainable. So for us Danes who believe very much in green economy and the high standard of living, a blue sky like today, is much more attractive at 7%, with still a very high growth rate.
The biggest highlight this year is the country's unprecedented emphasis on the rule of law. Among more than 500 motions raised by the NPC deputies, an overwhelming 90% were on legislation.
This year is the beginning for China to comprehensively push ahead with the rule of law. And having good laws to begin with is the core of the whole undertaking.
At the end of the NPC session, a groundbreaking legislation law has been passed with some major changes in defining the boundaries between government and citizens. Under the legislation law, new laws to be passed in the future cannot increase citizens' liabilities or take away their rights without legal basis, and provincial level government must get NPC approval before raising taxes.
The bills passed at National People's Congress are legally binding. The votes here in the heart of the Chinese capital have decided the country's next move and will affect the lives of hundreds of millions of people. Back to you, Susan.